Today is April 29th, 2026. I'm Donald Fingar, and this is FTE-211 Week 1 assignment. Give 2 dates in history that support the modern 1911. I chose the 1950s with the release of the Commander model by Colt. It was a shorter 1911 with the 4.25-inch barrel, the shorter slide, the smaller frame. It was lighter in weight and had a ring hammer. With a smaller 1911, it basically made it more favorable for concealed carry, which is definitely a trait with the current 1911. I also chose the lightweight Commander, which was part of that release in the 1950s. And the importance specifically of the lightweight Commander was it was the first mass-produced American pistol with the aluminum alloy by Colt that was 9mm. So it was the first time that the 1911 went to the 9mm Parabellum. And of course, it was a cheaper round, it was easier to procure, which meant more people were willing to purchase this firearm because the ammo was so readily available. And also, with the smaller round needing less load, it made it easier to fire, which made more shooters happier with selecting the 1911 over some of the older and larger firearms. Since we're talking about the 1911 and the 9mm ammunition, we often hear the question about, well, why did the military move away from the 1911 and the 45 ACP? Now, there's a lot of smaller facts, but this is all umbrellas under the fact that we joined NATO, and when we joined NATO in the 1980s, they had decided that, well, we had to follow NATO's rules. So we're coming off World War II and the founding of NATO in 1949, and then we pushed into the sovereign expansion into Europe, the Soviet expansion into Europe, and we had joined NATO because we're like, no, we're not going to let this happen. And NATO decides that they're going to pass in 1982 the standardization agreement of 4090. And 4090 basically said, because we are part of the NATO alliance, we will use NATO-approved ammunition, specifically the 9mm Parabellum. The standardization agreement 4090 was authored and produced by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was titled the Standardization Agreement 4090, and its publication date was the 15th of April, 1982. So basically, we moved away from the 45 ACP because we joined NATO, and NATO said, hey, you need to use NATO-approved ammunition, and of course, it had some benefits. It had better price because it was cheaper to make, which required less load, which meant we could stretch our stores of gunpowder further. We could purchase them from other nations because they were manufacturing too, which meant that they were more readily available in combat spaces, which made it easier to supply the military with the ammunition needed. And because of the lesser load, it was easier to fire, and because it was easier to fire, it was easier to train troops on the M9 with the 9mm Parabellum.